Coming up on episode 68 of the Behind the Back podcast, Malik Monk starting for the Sacramento Kings. Does that create an identity to help build this team moving forward? Or maybe does that help build the depth on the bench via trade deadline? We'll talk about that. The Eagles. Are the 2024 Eagles better than the 2022 Eagles that made it to the Super Bowl? We'll talk about that. The Niners, with the season in shambles, coming to an end, potentially falling apart. Is Brock Purdy the guy moving forward, or will the Niners explore other options? The Chargers, they got a matchup with the Chiefs, the rivals. Will they be able to pull it off? And betting picks of the week. With that being said, guys, let's get it. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben, the Jet Rets. Ben, how are you, brother?
You know what? I'm doing good. We're coming off Thanksgiving, where stomach was full. Time with family was good. Everything was it was a good week until Sunday, but it was a good week. How about you?
It was good. Okay, before we segue here, what was your favorite food item that you had during Thanksgiving?
I'm a big stuffing guy, and so I for the first time ever, I had to make Thanksgiving with my girlfriend. My girlfriend, I guess she actually made the majority. I just helped her, but me helping makes me feel like I'm actually doing all of it. So
Right, exactly.
We made the stuffing, we made the hams, everything, and the stuffing turned out like perfect. And for me, I was hyped because it's always been my favorite, like Thanksgiving Day, food item. And so to have the stuffing turn out the way it did, for all the preparation and everything that we did the 2 nights before and the day of Thanksgiving, it was great.
I love that. Over here, they don't really believe in the turkey stuffing gig over here. So they did steaks from the butcher shop, and then we did homemade mac and cheese, and it was amazing. It was fire. So
love mac and cheese.
I talked to Mama Ruth, and Mama Ruth said she'll hook me up with some stuffing when we go down to Arizona.
Nice.
It's the best. So no, but yeah, super chill. Nothing too crazy. I'm glad you had a good Thanksgiving, though. That's good. For everyone out there, I hope you all had a good Thanksgiving week as well.
Yes.
So we got a lot to talk about. Obviously, in the intro, we got some juicy topics to go off of. So we're going to obviously start with the Kings. The win tracker, hey, they added a couple wins here, but they've also taken some disappointing losses, 2-2 in the last 4 since we last spoke. So let's start with the first 2 because the major changes happened in the last 2. But we finally got a win against Minnesota in a close game. Thank goodness. And we lost to Portland. So let's talk about the win against Minnesota real quick. What do you think? Because that was the introduction of Jay Crowder on this team and in the starting lineup with no practice, no training whatsoever with this group. And I kind of liked what he brought. But what points from that game stood out to you?
It was the fight of that team. This season we've seen the Sacramento Kings struggle to fight back and hit back when they've taken punches, whether that be a run or whether that be trash talk or whatever the case. It just felt like the Kings would play into whatever the other team was essentially, giving them instead of trying to find their own fight. And in this game against the Timberwolves the day before Thanksgiving, it felt like, the Timberwolves were trying to punk the Kings in a way, specifically Julius Randle, because he has always had beef with Jay Crowder and vice versa. Those two have had beef for essentially like 4 or 5 years now. And it was alive and well on that basketball court starting basically in the third quarter when you really started to see all of it take place. And what I really liked was you see the team, the Kings, really rally behind the energy that Jay was bringing to the court. And ultimately was the reason why the Kings were able to get that win against the Timberwolves. Because after that point, when the energy level got up there because of the trash talk, the Kings just ultimately took over that game and they really didn't look back. So I just loved in that game the energy that they brought, how they didn't let the Timberwolves punk them, how they fought back and then ultimately fought back harder.
Yeah, and I think, we didn't know what to expect with Jay. Obviously, the reason they brought in Jay Crowder was they were going to bring him in anyway, but Trey Lyles did get hurt and he's out for basically a month. So you lose a key piece on that bench rotation. So you need to find someone anywhere. And honestly, Jay Crowder is you know, he is what he is at this point of his career, but he's always been a contributor on championship level teams. He won with I believe it was the Bucks, and he played for the Suns for a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
So he's he's been there and done that and kind of knows what it takes. And I think that we kind of needed a little bit of his style of energy to kind of salvage the season in a way. Because listen, like we have leaders, like we have Fox and Domas and DeMar and Malik. Well, and Malik kind of falls into the J bucket a little bit, but like we don't have as many like I should say like aggressive guys who aren't afraid to talk their stuff, because De'Aaron really talks his stuff when someone instigates him first, and he's not normally the first instigator. And I wish that there are times where he kind of would just take that approach, because he's a much better player when he's kind of backing up his talk. Um, but to have Jay in the building, and then you have Malik back, so you can almost have two dudes at any point, or at least one guy on the court at any point, who can bring that kind of physicality and tenacity that we can use moving forward. Obviously against the Blazers, that just wasn't happening, but that was a product of some other stuff, more than just personnel, and it was just a rough night for us. I don't know if there was anything from the Portland game that stuck out to you.
Not really. That Portland game was disastrous in a lot of ways, because you came off that Timberwolves game feeling like this team had turned a corner in a lot of ways, and then you see more of the same of their unfortunate season taking place in this game, and it was like, man, we thought we made some progress here, and all of a sudden we're back to our old ways. And so it was frustrating from that standpoint, because it felt like, are we just hitting our heads against the wall? Are we struggling with the inconsistencies that we saw all last year? Like it was a frustrating loss, and in a lot of ways felt like the worst loss of the season at that point.
And then we turn our attention to the Spurs game,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll talk about the intricacies of that game in a second here, the important part about that game. But that game, they were Malik had commented after the game that they're like, man, they're going to hit their shots because we're leaving them wide open. And I also felt like in the Spurs games, they were hitting every tough shot they could take. Wemby obviously had like a 30-point triple-double, I believe, or really, really close to one. It always feels like, because I when we watch these games, it just makes me feel like there are times where, yes, they're leaving guys a little bit more open, or maybe they're not closing out as hard as they should be. But then on the ones that they do close out hard and stuff, then they're making them anyway. And I think that's hard for some of these guys. Again, we talked about the mental aspect of it. Excuse me. And I just don't know sometimes, dude. I watch these games and I'm like, the refs aren't on our side sometimes. These guys are missing shots. They're getting tough shots made on them, and it's just like a nice mixture of all this negativity that just festers throughout the course of a game.
So, and on that note, this is one of the things that I wrote about on X earlier this week after falling to the Blazers, was this team, they lack leadership, and in a lot of ways. And obviously you have your court leader in De'Aaron Fox, and you have your veteran out there in a veteran presence in DeMar, who's been on team after team and seen different, all different looks. But what this team lacks is when there's foul calls going the opposite direction, when teams are making 3-point shots that they shouldn't be making against you, regardless of what your coverage is, like you have to have somebody who steps up and circles you up in the center of the court, whether it's cheesy or not, it circles you up in the center of the court and locks you the hell in, because that's the key for this team. In a lot of ways, you lack that leadership on the court. And look, Mike Brown can do what he can on the sideline, but you need a guy out there in a De'Aaron Fox or in a Malik Monk or in somebody to fire this team up and find that motivation when things aren't going. And that's, one of the things I said was the Sacramento Kings team lacks leadership, and a lack of leadership leads to a lack of consistency and identity. And that's something that we have seen throughout this season so far. Now, we kind of saw some shift in last night's game, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But we definitely saw more of that same, with Portland and San Antonio, those two games where it was like, do we have a leader? Do we have somebody who's willing to step up to the plate, take it on the chin for the entire team, and then go out there and tell his guys like what we need to fix, how we need to fix it? Because it can't just be Mike Brown. Like that's the part that's driving me nuts. And I'm not saying that there's not a guy out there leading them, but it's hard to see a leader on the court when you see crazy runs against you, when you see all these, things going wrong on the court, and every single one of them are fighting the officials. I get it. The officials have been terrible this season, but as a true leader, you got to step up and tell your guys to knock it off. Like, stop talking to them. Let's just play our game.
Exactly.
That was one thing like Mike Bibby said before last night's game against the Rockets, was they were talking about how the Rockets were going to come out, and I guess we'll shift here. How the Rockets were going to come out and, try and punk them and pick a fight. Because, look, I mean, they got guys up and down the roster that are willing to pick a fight, and Dylan Brooks and Jabari Smith. And it's, it's guys who are ready to get in your head the second that ball is tipped off. And they did that. And one of the things that Mike said in the pregame was, let them do that, but don't let them take you out of your element. Don't let them take you out of your game. And when he said that, it kind of like clicked in my brain. I was like, this is something that the Kings have also struggled with all year. They play not just to their opponent's level, but they play to their opponent's game. So whatever their game is that their opponent is playing, they play the same game. Even with the Timberwolves, how the Timberwolves started that trash talk. Well, the Kings bounced back with trash talk and also backed up their trash talk. But I mean, they got that one right. But there's been so many losses where you've played to the strengths of the other team.
Right.
You react to what they're doing rather than enforcing what your strengths are. And that's something that, like, again, you find that in leadership on the court, not just in coaching. You find it on the court with those leaders. And that's, when Bibbs said that, I was like, man, that's eye-opening. And look, last night against the Rockets, they tried to punk them. Dylan Brooks started something in the middle of the court, and it just, from there, you saw this energy lit underneath this team, which you saw the same of against the Timberwolves the day before Thanksgiving. And there's something to be said about when De'Aaron Fox is pissed off.
Exactly.
Like, if at this point, if I'm like Malik Monk, I'm going into every single game and I'm saying something to De'Aaron that just pisses him off and get him going. Like, honestly, because that's kind of what a leader does. You got to kind of figure out what gets each of your guys going. For Fox, you got to piss him off and he's going to drop 10 on your head in 2 minutes. With Malik, similar thing. With Domas, hit him in the face,
Yeah.
So there's a sense of that leadership where we need somebody out there who can essentially get our guys going when nothing else is going. And I found that last night in a little bit with Fox, where he really took that game into his hands when that trash talk all started. And he was like, you're not going to come over here and punk us. We're losing right now. We're not going to lose again. And I'm not going to lose to you, was the mentality that you saw in Fox. And I thought that the Kings stepped up very well at the end of the second quarter, pulling that game back because they were down, I believe it was 8 or 9 points. They pulled it back to within 1. They might have even taken the lead. I can't remember. But, Keegan hit that 3 right before halftime, which was eye-opening, was awesome to see, like a heartfelt. You could feel it in your soul because Keegan's been, struggling all season long. And he hits that 3. It's like, okay, that was good. Comes back out. You see DeMar DeRozan in the third go for like 3 and 1s. You see Keegan hit 2 more 3s in a row, and this team's rolling, and they're up by like 11. So, and they really didn't look back from there. So these are the kind of games that you build off of. And that was my overall takeaway from the Rockets game is this is the game you look at in this entire season, regardless of the wins we've had, regardless of how big the victory is or how bad the loss is. This game right here is the one you build off of because you learned a lot about the Sacramento Kings in this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean, at the time yesterday, Rockets are still, I believe, the 2nd seed. So they're 15-6. They were doing a great job going into this game, and one of the hottest teams in the West. And I want to ask you something in terms of the leadership thing. These past 2 games, you mentioned shifts. There has been a shift, and that shift has been Malik Monk in the starting lineup for this team. So Malik's finally getting his first chance to start. Um, and I wonder, obviously it takes a little getting used to, but I think for having a guy like Malik, I think it's interesting, the concept of playing your best 5 players on the floor at one time, I think, seems to work out every now and again. Um, but I kind of like, and we talked about going into the seasons, yeah, Malik got paid, but they're paying him to be the 6th man because we have Kevin and Keon and other guys to rotate in. But do you think, having Malik there as kind of the spark plug, because again, we talked about this, the minutes don't change. It's not like he plays any less, whether he starts or whether he doesn't. So I think maybe just having Malik there right out of the gate to provide another, just to help boost guys like Deer, and you're playing with your best friend right out of the gate, and instead of staggering and playing less time with each other. But I think that also allows Deer to get his rest early, and then you still don't have to sacrifice anything, especially if one of those two are in rhythm early on. So I'm curious to think, do you think that maybe having Malik as our long-term starter provides that leadership, that extra jolt to the starting 5 that maybe allows us to start off more consistently and maybe not fall into some of these deep holes that we get into during the game?
I do think so. We talked pretty extensively in the offseason about who we think, should be starting for the Kings at that two spot. And we played with all the different ideas, including Malik Monk. And it really came down to for us to, we like the spark that he brings off the bench. Well, he was the only spark off the bench, and our starting lineup wasn't doing anything essentially for the first quarter of the year. And so like you said, to throw him in the starting lineup after having been on the team for 3 years to get his first start as a Sacramento King, you saw his spark that he brings off the bench every single game. You saw his spark then in an immediate presence with that starting group. And I think that it's infectious what Malik brings to a court in terms of his energy. They always talk about the Kings commentators. They refer back to Doug Christie, who was also a commentator before he was with the coaching staff. And he talks about how that ball has energy when it gets moving. You want that ball moving when you're on offense. Move it around. The ball has energy. That'll find guys. Guys will get energy off of it. Malik moves the ball. Last night, he finished with 12 assists, which was a career high for him. He had no turnovers. So when you talk about what it means to have a spark like that to start a game, it's massive, because we've seen so many times this year this team get into a funk in the first quarter and have to dig their way out of it. And we've also seen so many times them not be able to dig out of it. They'll mount a comeback, but when you go down 25 and you can only get 15 back, you're still losing by 10.
Right.
Even if you lose by 1, you're still losing. So not digging yourself into that hole early and finding that spark early and finding that energy early. If you're playing from ahead rather than playing from behind, what did we talk about last week? About how important it is. Every shot has so much more weight when you're losing by 16 than when you're tied or when you're up by 8. Like, when you're down 16 and you have a wide open shot, you're probably going to miss it, because you realize, like, well, I make this one, I still got to make another and another and another to get back in this game. Like, it's such a heavy shot at that point. Right. And I think that that's also another reason why you're starting to see these shots fall, is because we're actually being competitive in these last 2 games.
So let me ask you, because the ramifications that this could possibly bring if Malik ends up just staying the long-term starter, right? So we lose our 6th man off the bench. So now the rest of the bench comes into question. You have Kevin Huerter, you have Trey. Keon didn't play last night, but you have him on the bench. Devin Carter's going to come back in the fold in a couple months. And now you have Jay. Isaac Jones has made a nice appearance. And you have Alex Len. So that's kind of, and Jordan McLaughlin, it should something happen, right? So you have kind of these pieces, but I wonder if maybe, because that's the other thing with like Mike Brown that kind of bugs me a little bit is like I'm very curious to see what happens once Trey comes back because
Yeah.
Isaac Jones has been playing very well in his absence. And Isaac Jones, the undrafted rookie from Washington State, has made an impression over these past few games now that Trey's out. And I'm afraid because Mike Brown's kind of weird where he trusts the guys that he's already played, has had playing before. And I'm worried that once Trey comes back, instead of playing both of them together off the bench, he's just going to sit Isaac and then just let Trey run back again. When in reality, I feel like you could have better lineups if you include more size and a guy who's a little more physical.
Mm-hmm.
And he could play off the bench in that kind of role because Trey will naturally just spread the floor. So do you think that now with Malik potentially in the starting lineup, there might actually be more potential for a shakeup on the roster via trade, in the going into the later part of the season?
So I think it's likely. I think there's likely a move regardless of who's going to get the minutes, whether it's Trey or Isaac. For me, we talked last week about this team not having an identity on offense and defense, and I was talking about how you need to at least have one so that you
Yeah.
can kind of know a direction that you need to go. Having Malik in the starting lineup, we've been putting up numbers in quarters. Like against the oh my gosh, the team before the Rockets.
The Spurs.
Against the Spurs. It was a loss, but they still had, I believe, a quarter where they hit 40. Let me pull it up real quick. Let me look. Yeah, we had a 42-point first quarter. So that was Malik's first start, right?
Yeah.
And if you can consistently have quarters like last night and like against the Spurs. So last night they had a 42-point third quarter and a 33-point second quarter. If you have quarters like that, you're pretty much set offensively because you can trust that your starters at this point are going to put up numbers. So then off the bench, personally, I feel like off the bench, you just need defense to balance out the rest of your roster.
Right.
And this is something that I think that the Kings could benefit from when it comes to that trade deadline. If you can go out and just establish depth and at the same time establish a defensive identity, it comes down to two guys. Look at how many guys Mike played last night. He played 8 guys before the last 2 minutes of the game when it was garbage time.
Right.
He had an 8-man rotation like it was the freaking playoffs. That is what I want. I mean, that's really what I want from Mike. 8 or 9 guys. That's all majority of teams are using, at least in the later stages of the season.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're playing from behind record-wise like this, you go to an 8-man rotation, the 8-man rotation that you can trust. If that 8-man rotation has 3 guys coming off the bench who are defensive monsters, you're going to be fine. And this is something that I think the Kings would benefit from if they go into that trade deadline with the idea that they're going to build the bench defensively.
Okay, so let's talk about it real quick then. I'm curious. Not specific player, to bring in because we don't know who's available like fully just yet because that list opens up as the longer the season goes and depending on certain teams. But let's imagine in a world, let's say, Mike Brown let's say he doesn't want Keon, or maybe it's time to move on from Kevin, and maybe even Trey if you're trying to go the route of getting a better defensive presence, right? And then you draft Evan Carter because he's a more all-around player. He's a guard who can size up and defend at all levels because of his natural length that he has. So then let's say he comes back and he's healthy and he plays and he gets minutes off the bench. And then we keep Jay Crowder. He comes off the bench. And then maybe we trade for a legitimate piece or two off the bench, like a Dorian Finney-Smith or maybe even a Cam Johnson, stuff like that. But who do you think is the most likely candidate now? If we're doing early season potential trade rumors, who would you be most okay with kind of, for lack of a better word, sacrificing off the bench?
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's a sacrifice because I love all these guys. I mean, we watched a majority of these guys be the team who broke that playoff curse for this team. But in a lot of ways, I mean, look at the Domantas Sabonis trade. You have to give up talent to get talent. And this is a reality that you've got to, kind of come to standards with. For me, I'm okay with moving pretty much everybody who's not starting currently for the Sacramento Kings. Because look, man, you're 10-12 right now. It's not working. You have a lot of talent on this team, 1-5. And it's, you're essentially at the quarter part of the season, and it just, you're looking on the outside of the play-in game. Something's got to change, and you've got to kind of accept that. So for me, Herder's on the board for sure. I personally feel like Keon's on the board, and I like Keon a lot, but offensively, I think he's a liability. I know he had that 9 3-pointers, and that was fantastic, but it's not sustainable. Where has he been since then?
Right.
And in terms of getting a consistent rotation in Mike's system, he doesn't get that. I think Mike secretly doesn't like Keon, but
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I feel that.
So I'm fine with that. I like Isaac Jones a lot, and I think he could be a really good piece to trade. But I think his contract needs to be changed from a 50-50 into a full guarantee, right? So there's some steps there. I actually want to keep Jay Crowder because I think Jay brings an awesome veteran experience, not just a veteran experience being in the league a long time, but he's been to a championship, and that's the kind of vet you need right now, because he knows what it takes to get there. He wasn't the guy who carried that team, but he was a part of that journey.
Yeah.
And being a part of the journey is just enough. Is just enough to help a team just get to a playoff. He knows what it takes. He knows how long this journey takes. So I want to keep him. Jordan McLaughlin, Doug McDermott, Alex Len. I like Alex Len a lot, but honestly, like I said, it could be just about anybody off the bench except for the one guy in Jay Crowder. And I'm ready to build the bench, because that's what it is. We're lacking depth in a lot of ways. And when you look at the guys who stepped in the absences of Malik being injured and, DeRozan missing time and Sabonis being out, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And, it's tough because the guys who are coming off the bench don't necessarily have the most set offense or defensive game. It's kind of like they're still establishing those in a lot of ways. Kevin's coming off of a bad injury. Isaac Jones is fresh. Jay Crowder he's been sitting for a little bit. Jordan McLaughlin, his plus minus and his I think what was it, his assist to turnover ratio was one of the best of all time or something there for a minute, but he doesn't score a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a smaller guard. So there is a lot of weakness coming off the bench.
I think that when you look at some of these teams around the league, the big thing now, there's always trends, right? So when the Warriors were popping off, it's space the floor, get as many shooters as you can, go small ball. And now you look at teams like the Celtics, you have bigger players at every position. You look at teams like Cleveland, you have the 2 small guards, but everyone else on that roster is huge. So it's now you look at teams that in their rosters are big, versatile players. And we lack big, versatile players. Our starting 5, they're all kind of versatile, but for their position, they're all small. So Domas as a center is a small center. So it's one of those things where off the bench, we really just have more small guys. And that's something that if we had a little bit more size and a little bit more versatility, those would be the pieces needed to complete this roster. And I completely am on board. Where basically everyone's kind of on the table. We're 10-12. We need to make a move. We can't just accept being cruising around 500. That's not going to get the job done this year. So we need to and it might need to be, I would say sooner rather than later, but that's just not how it works. It'll happen over here in the next few weeks. Trade talks will start happening and start getting much more serious on, who might be available and when the move might be made. And that, I would be very surprised if Monty is not active this trade deadline. We've talked about it the past couple of years, will they make a trade? And they didn't want to disrupt the continuity. They disrupted it a little bit in the offseason, so you shouldn't be afraid to shake it up more in order to, try to make a push and try to salvage the season and not make it a waste, because We don't know how far of a cliff DeMar's about to jump off of in these next 2 years, because we're getting good production from him, but we don't want this to be a wasted season. We don't want this to be a wasted season
Right.
for De'Aaron, Malik, for all these guys. So,
Right.
I hope that we can establish something like that.
I
So
think, just to interrupt you real quick,
no,
I
you're
think
good.
there's also a world where you do you want to hold on to De'Aaron Fox? Like, this is
Right.
a legit thing you got to pay attention to, because I think people are overlooking, he's a part of Clutch. Like, Clutch Sports is, and this is the thing, if their guys aren't happy, they're going to move them, and
Yeah.
they're going to go find the best spot for their guy. So this is something that the Kings need to be aware of. If you want to hold on to Fox, you got to start winning soon, because that was one of the reasons why he didn't want to sign that contract, let alone the money. He wanted to see, he mentioned being a contender. Well,
Mhm.
bro, we're on the outside of the play-in right now.
Yeah, and when you think about that too, it's not even just like finding the best deal for him. At the end of the day, he could potentially, if he continues at the pace he's on, and then they start winning games and he has a successful season, all he needs is all NBA third team, and
Right.
when we now owe him $300 million. And when you owe him that much money, when you're already paying Domas 250 mil, and or over 200 million, and then a Keegan extension's coming up, so how much are you going to pay him? And with all the inflated money and the new salary cap rules, with first apron, second apron, and the penalties that come with that, team building becomes way more difficult. It's not
Mm-hmm.
it's not as simple anymore. So if you're going to marry Fox and Domas, you need to have a team that's capable of winning like the way you did in 22, where you can win with those two specifically as your leaders and have everyone
Right.
else work around them. So that's the issue we run into. And obviously Fox is under contract for another year, but that means if things go horribly south, then you got to trade, and then it's a rental, and it's bad. So yeah, we do face that possibility too of a potential. I would say rebuild, but we have pieces that would make us
To
sustainable
retool.
to retool. We could get a lot back for Fox, so it wouldn't be
Yeah.
like, oh man, like we're completely crippled. Yes, we lose an all-star point guard, and that's hard to replace, but at the end of the day, if that's what needs to happen, then that's what's going to happen. So yeah, those
Yep.
possibilities exist when you lose, so we need to win so we can avoid that kind of issue.
Yeah, and that's the key coming up. So, trade deadline is something we're going to keep an eye on. The Kings are expected, like I've been reading up and down articles and whatnot. Everything is speculation at this point, but everything is speculating and pointing to the Kings are going to be very active in the trade market coming up. So this
Better
is
be.
something we got to keep our eye on, because like we just mentioned, everything should be out on the table. Not that it is, but everything should be, because you're 10-12 with, going into the season, you had aspirations of at the least winning 50 games. Like, that was the known goal, not just on our podcast, but the known goal in Sacramento. And you're not necessarily on your way to doing that.
Right.
You're below 500. So everything should be on the table. It's going to be interesting to see how this shakes down. But the biggest takeaways from these last 4 games is, the biggest one for me is just Malik in the starting lineup. It gives us that identity that we've been lacking so much on the offensive end of the ball. And that's where, if you can just get one identity, whether it's offensive or defensive, if you can lock one of those in, you're actually going to have a way better chance retooling successfully at the trade deadline, because you're not going to be gambling. You're not going to be like, well, what if I get offense here and then defense here and do this? Will that work? Like, what am I missing? Is it offense or is it defense?
Right.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're making your threes and you're putting up 120 points, but you're allowing a team to score 130. The obvious issue is defense.
Yeah. So I guess so the main thing we're going to be looking for now, I think, is number one, you're still dealing with injuries. What are the rotations we're going to see now that Malik is in the starting lineup? Will Mike change that? That's going to be the question. How long will he ride with
Yes.
Malik in the starting lineup? Because Mike Brown is unpredictable in that sense, where we think he's going one way, and then one guy has a bad game, and now it's another guy. So I'm like, I wonder if
It drives me nuts.
exactly. So if he sticks with Malik this whole time, how does that look? And does that make our team that much better? We're obviously 1-1 so far in the experiment, so we don't small sample size. So we'll see in this next stretch of games if we're able to do that. That's definitely something I'm looking out for.
100%.
All right, so I think that's enough Kings talk for now. It's time to pivot on over. So hopefully we can add some wins to the win tracker and start climbing. We have to climb, unfortunately. We weren't wanting to be in this position, but hopefully we can get up there. So we will transition. We will be right back to talk some Eagles. Let's go for it. All right, we are back to talk some Philadelphia Eagles, dude. They just keep on winning. They beat the Baltimore Ravens 24-19, and it was, you know what, garbage time touchdown, 24-12, but they scored at the end there. But I felt really good about that game, dude. And for those who didn't check out the post-game pod, we definitely put it up there. So please feel free to check it out if you want to see me freak out. So, dude, let's start with just the quick moments of the game here, because there was really just, for me, there's a lot of moments, as there are in every single game, but I think the two moments that stuck out to me, obviously the first one was the Saquon Barkley 25-yard touchdown to kind of get everything going for this team. And again, just another amazing game by Saquon Barkley, being able to, at the drop of a hat, when there's few things guaranteed in life, death, taxes, and Saquon Barkley lighting a team up in the second half of a game. And he was able to step up again and again, 25-yard touchdown to really just kind of get us going, and I was really happy about it. My next moment and my final moment, just doing two today, Cooper DeJean, the easy one. It was Cooper DeJean, and it was less of a slammed hit versus you fundamentally tackled and lifted Derrick Henry up and was able to put him down on the ground. Quinyon Mitchell had a bigger hit on Mark Andrews early in the game where he missiled into him. So that was a more aggressive hit, and I think had Cooper did that to Derrick Henry, that'd be the highlight everyone would be talking about. But he lifting him up, catching him at the very end, being able to tackle him at that point was an awesome play, especially at that moment, open field 1-on-1. And I gotta give Cooper a shout out because he's been in that kind of position with star players consistently this season, where he's just 1-on-1 in space and he just always wins the battle. So that was my moment of the game. I wanted to ask you what you think of this team now, from your perspective, now that they beat the Ravens and just keep on winning.
Look, man, there's not much negative to say about them. The way that they've been playing, as of really like eight weeks now. What Sunday really showed me, and it should have showed the NFL, was the Eagles can beat you a number of ways. And the number of ways can be the quarterback, it can be the running game, it can be the defense. It's hard, man. This is a top 5 defense easily. You could argue top 3 offensively. When you guys are cooking, top 5 for sure. And what's interesting about it is I saw a stat this week that the Eagles they have the least amount of completions on the year, but the least amount of attempts as well.
Yep.
And this is something, bro. If I told you that last season, you'd be like, well, yeah, because Jalen can't, they can't trust Jalen to throw the ball, and so we're forced to run the game, or whatever the case. But this year, the story is you have freaking Saquon Barkley, and he's dominating teams every single week.
Yeah.
And so this is that reliability in the run game that teams like you need this. You want this. This is what you search for, is that reliability to get that run game going. And when Saquon gets the game going for the Eagles, everything opens up. And Jalen has been able to sit so comfortably back there with a wide open field and make awesome plays every week, essentially since Saquon really got rolling this season. So what was that, week 1? No, it's been killer, man. In a lot of ways, this is what the Niners were last year.
Exactly.
It's almost a carbon copy in a lot of ways. And so it's fun to see from an outside perspective, even though I hate you guys.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, and you're not wrong. And for Jalen, I think the thing that, when I was watching First Things First today, and they mentioned, the impact that a player like that has, he said it's so rare for quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks will go their entire careers without having a running back that can have that level of impact, not even not CMC or Saquon, where you're going to get 2,000 yards, but even just 1,000-yard running back. Like, some guys just go their whole careers without one. But having one and having a season like Saquon's having just makes Jalen's life a million times easier. Dude had 118 yards of passing. When your offense doesn't need to rely on your quarterback to be incredibly special on a week-to-week basis, it's different. It's something that not many teams actually get to have and experience. But that doesn't mean that Jalen, they did this whole thing and they talked to Sirianni about it, where they're like, oh, they did the whole Brock Purdy thing of last year. We're like, oh, is Jalen just a game manager at this point? And Nick was like, oh, it's very foolish to just call him a game manager. And he used a different word. But, it's one of those things that all we asked, what was crippling us during that 2-2 stretch in the first 4 weeks of the season, was Jalen turning the ball over like crazy. And we needed him to manage the game better in order for this team to kind of just reach the potential. Jalen's not turning the ball over. He's had 2 total turnovers since the bye. And when you're complementing that with an insane run game on top of a top 5 defense, that's just a recipe for success. You just need your quarterback not to mess things up for you. And that doesn't mean that Jalen isn't special or that he doesn't have the ability to carry this team when needed. But when you have a guy like Saquon and he's having the season that he's having, you might as well, like you've mentioned before, like run into the dirt, basically. He's stayed healthy this season. He's continuously just carried us load after load every single game. And I just think that the fact that they've embraced this identity of just being this ground and pound team, we're going to beat you through the ground, time of possession, and then our defense is going to stop you. You could have a 2-time MVP on the other side, and that's not going to matter. And that's the thing with this team that, when I look back on different versions of this team, this Philadelphia Eagles team over the years, I think they're better than the 2022 Eagles. And it's because of the way they operate is a much more sustainable style. And Jalen had an amazing year in 2022. Shane Steichen and him were having an awesome time, really picking apart defenses. But last year, when we asked Jalen to be something that he wasn't, it didn't work out. But this year, we have the best running back this team's ever had, and we pair that with an offensive line that's dominating and a defensive line that's dominating. And those were 2 of the spots going into this year where they were kind of unknowns. Like, oh, you're losing Jason Kelsey. Oh, you're losing Fletcher Cox. So you're losing your 2 biggest leaders on both sides of the fronts. How are they going to respond, losing that kind of caliber of players? And all they've done is improve each and every week, and still are the 2 of the most dominant fronts in the league. And I think that's just, when I think about what this team is capable of doing and why I believe in them much more than I did last year when they also had a 10-2 record at this point. I feel so good about this team, and it's because we're the most physical team in the league. And you're seeing the teams that are executing this year, the Steelers, the Lions, the Chiefs, even. Like, there are teams that they just out physical you and make games ugly, make games hard. And when we took a team like Baltimore, who's usually the bully, and we just went ahead and bullied them, no problem, that's saying something. That's a sign that that's sustainable. That's the culture that Nick Sirianni built. And we got to give him credit, because people were crapping on him 8 weeks ago. And now he's kind of earned his way back into the good graces by just doing what he does best, establishing the culture, and just staying out of the headlines. And that's something that, when you have all those pieces working together, this team just looks unstoppable. And then when you add the injuries to the Lions defense, then you're like, oh, now the top contender is even more vulnerable. You can push for that 1 seed. So I like this team, dude. I think they are better than the 2022 Eagles. I think they have a great chance of going to the Super Bowl this year.
I think this is the year that, we talked about last year with CMC and how the Niners had their shot. This is another one of those years similar to CMC, where you have Saquon Barkley, who is just playing at an all-time level, not just for his career, but I mean, he's on the verge of breaking Eric Dickerson's, 2,100 yard record.
Exactly.
At the pace that he's going. And this is a historic season. This is the kind of season you need to go win the Super Bowl. Like, you build these kind of teams for a run like this. And if that's not the goal at this point, obviously it is. But if that's not the goal, and the goal is just to get to the Super Bowl, well, you're underperforming at that point, because this team is more than capable of getting there, especially with the kind of injuries that some of these top dogs are starting to see now. So I want to ask you, is Saquon your MVP right now? For if you try to take your homer opinion out of this,
Okay.
would you say that Saquon is the MVP of the NFL? And the reason I ask you this is because around this time last year, you asked me a very similar question, but you also asked it about Brock Purdy, and you said, if you had to take one being MVP, which one makes the most sense? And I told you it's a quarterback award in a lot of ways. They don't give this to non-quarterbacks, but at this point, Saquon's having a better season than CMC had last year. It's similar, but it's better. And from a statistical standpoint, to break a record like Eric Dickerson's, that's something that really doesn't happen. Would that solidify him, not just for you? I want to know your opinion, but I also want to know what you think. Would that solidify him as the MVP?
I think if the Eagles win out, so if the Eagles win out and maybe they take the 1 seed over the Lions, he passes the record. I think he has to get the record. I don't think even if he's like 20 yards short, it's not the record. So he has to get the record. They have to win out, or at least finish in the top of the conference. And I do think he needs more touchdowns. And I also think he'd be the front runner for MVP if Jalen Hurts didn't exist on this team, because they would give him the ball and he would have 10 more touchdowns and he'd have 20 touchdowns already. So it's like, it is one of those things that does hamper him a little bit. And then when you look at some of the hypes that, like you said, quarterbacks get, Lamar always gets the attention this time of year. Josh Allen is now the front runner for MVP after an awesome showing.
Jared Goff's up there.
Jared Goff is up there. And those are the things where you look at these quarterbacks, and I think everyone in the league, I think every media pundit, everyone who votes on the MVP, that the votes matter, understands how important Saquon is, but they always lean towards a quarterback because the quarterback is the person that touches the ball every single play. And that's the part where here's the thing too. If Saquon doesn't win the award, if he breaks the rushing record and doesn't win the award, then a running back's never going to win it again. Because that's just not how it's going to be. Because if you can have the greatest running back season ever and not win MVP, then when will a running back win MVP? But I do think this particular season, if the Ravens continue to struggle, because statistically Lamar has been the best player and he's putting up numbers that are crazy and MVP-like numbers, but his team has struggled, especially in recent weeks. And the NFL is all about recency bias. If you're cooking this week, if you're cooking this particular week, you're going to get the attention. Like Josh Allen jumped up the boards. It was a Niner game, but the Niners haven't been what they, normally are, but he put up 4 touchdowns and, he looked the part. So when you compile all these different teams and how they do, like you look at the Chiefs, they're 11-1, and normally in this position, Mahomes would be the front runner, but he hasn't played as well as he normally would have. And the teams looked kind of fluky with all these 1-score games. So nobody really buys that the Chiefs are this juggernaut and he's leading this juggernaut. So if I believe Saquon could be the MVP. I don't think if it were to end today, he wouldn't win, which is frustrating. But if he continues this pace, breaks the record, finishes with like 15 touchdowns, it's gonna be really hard to argue. And what if he pops off for, what if he pops off again for another 200-yard game, and all of a sudden it's not just the rushing record, it's the all-time scrimmage yards record? Then what? So then those things, those possibilities still exist because he's still on that pace to at least compete with it. So if he has another 180, 200-yard game, then we're talking about the all-time scrimmage yards record, and that's just going to be hard to deny for a non-QB to question the impact, especially if the Eagles just keep winning.
Yeah, I agree with that. You mentioned the quarterback touching the ball, more than anybody else, and that being a major factor into why, MVPs are decided. I talked about how the Eagles have the lowest pass percentage, in terms of attempts throughout this year. They've ran the ball 442 times this year. I just looked the stat up. Okay. You guys have blown away the second place, team in Pittsburgh, who's ran the ball 403 times.
I didn't think they ran that much. Wow.
Right. And that's not to say that Saquon's seen the ball 442 times, but he's probably seen it 300,
Yeah.
Like, I think 300 is probably a safe number. So for him to see that many touches and to do what he's done with it, for me, it's easy. You can't look at this Eagles team and think that Jalen Hurts is the reason for their success. And
Correct.
I mean, this is my outside opinion, and you can roast me for it. I don't see how Jalen is a major factor in why this team is winning this year. I see Saquon being that leader. You talked about Saquon being the leader and being, the guy out there for the Eagles. He's been that every single week. He has been the stepping stone and the safe spot, the reliable point for this team week in and week out, no matter who is on the other side of the football. And that's something that you search for and you look for in an MVP. So
for sure,
the way it sits right now, he's my MVP. I mean, it's close. It is close. My second is Josh Allen. My third is probably Jared Goff. But Jared Goff raises some questions for me, and Josh Allen's having his best season yet. And what he did against the Niners was a ton of fun. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit before I start crying here in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I love what Saquon's doing. I asked that because, it's a conversation that's come up a lot lately.
For sure.
And to get outside opinions and have inside opinions on that, it's interesting to kind of marry those up and see, the differing opinions. But
yeah, I think that when it comes to what people look for in an MVP is always like what happens during MVP seasons is gaudy numbers, insane plays. So like if you want to make the argument for Josh Allen, it's that, lateral back that he just had with Amari in last game. So that's like a signature play, or the hurdle that he had he has those kind of plays. Saquon has the backwards hurdle, and he has the most explosive plays, 70 plus yards, 50 plus yard runs. Like he has those moments too. So from those standpoints, Saquon is checking those boxes. Now it's just a matter of, okay, if you're going to beat out a quarterback as a non-QB, you need to do something that's never been done in the modern NFL. And him breaking the rushing record could potentially be the reason that if he does win MVP, that would probably be everyone's main argument, was like, oh, he broke the rushing record now. And that's something that just hasn't been done in so long. But for right now, I understand why Josh is the front runner, but Saquon, if he continues at this pace, he's going to make it an argument and make it a fight. So I hope that Saquon does continue this and make this MVP conversation legitimate. But then, we talk about the touches and everything too. This might be the best season we'll ever get out of Saquon, because when you look at CMC, we talked about the amount of touches Saquon has. He's going to be on pace to shatter that. And CMC carried the ball, I believe it was 425-ish carries, including the postseason last year. And Saquon, he's probably going to hit like 500 plus carries. So for a guy who's usually injury prone, that if he survives the season, that's great. But if you don't get a Super Bowl, you're probably never getting a season like that again out of Saquon. So those are the things we got to look out for. But Saquon has just been a blessing. I figured he would have an awesome impact behind this offensive line. I could have never predicted potential breaking the rushing yards record. So it's been awesome.
So just to correct myself, he has run the ball, Saquon himself, 246 times. So a bit less than I thought. So, I mean, in terms of production, he's just crushing it, which, is such a shocker. But let's switch up here real quick and just talk about that Panthers game.
Yeah. So listen, Panthers are frisky, dude. They've been playing some good ball lately. I'm happy for Bryce, getting a second chance this season to kind of just, get into his development stage. This is something that he needed. He looks the part. He took KC to the end. He took the Buccaneers to the end. He had them, ahead with 30 seconds to go last week. So this Panthers team is frisky. They are going to try and present, they're not giving up on the season. I think they have a lot to play for from a developmental standpoint. You can tell how much they want it for each other, and they're playing hard and they're playing good. I think on the road, especially after a crushing loss to Tampa, to have to go to Philly, who's rolling, and your biggest weaknesses are the points that the Eagles will be able to take advantage of. I feel like, yeah, the Eagles are 12-point favorites in this game, and that's a lot. But I'm honestly not the least bit concerned. This defense I believe, is going to overwhelm the Panthers a little bit. Our cornerback talent is just significantly better than a lot of these teams in the league, and our ability to tackle and get guys down. Bryce is a little slippery because he's smaller and quick, so we might not be able to sack him. He might be able to get checkdowns off, but our ability to just tackle an open space individually on any single spot on the defense has allowed us to transform this defense. That's been the main difference from last year. We were old and slow. This year, we tackle anybody who's in front of us. And I just think that when you look at our defense, we're going to be able to suffocate him. And this has all the makings of another big Saquon game against the literal worst rushing defense in the league so far in Carolina. So Carolina allowed 220 plus yards to Tampa Bay last week. That's with Bucky Irving and Rashad White and their offensive line. Get Saquon Barkley in this offensive line. I'm sorry, guys. Like, Jalen probably is going to throw for 50 yards this game. Like, if they just hand it off to Saquon, like, they're going to win by like 14 points. So this has all the makings of a trouncing. Even with the injuries we have, Reed Blankenship had a concussion last week. He's definitely going to be out this game. Darius Slay he's been practicing, but he's still in concussion protocol. So we'll see if he passes that. I'm okay if he sits out another week. He should get more rest as a vet. I'd rather have him fresher for the playoffs. And then good news, Devontae Smith should be good to go with his hamstring. He's finally healed up. And then more bad news, Dallas Goedert is week to week with a hamstring. It was a knee thing, knee or ankle, it's a leg injury, whatever he had. Yeah, I didn't realize it later, but I didn't realize it until after the fact. But yeah, so he's dinged up again, but they said that he might go on IR, and if he does, he'll be back by the very last week of the regular season, and ready for the playoffs. So he'll be ready for the playoffs, which is honestly fine. But Dallas Goedert, man, he struggled to stay healthy over the past few years. He hasn't played a full season healthy since his rookie year in 2018. So this kind of has been an issue with Dallas, and I'm hoping that we can that he gets healthy. I'm okay. We can handle Grant Calcaterra, being our guy. He's done that in a few games, and we've been just fine. So I don't think it's gonna hinder us that much because Jalen trusts Grant, which is rare for him to trust a backup. So it's nice. So I'm not too worried about that. I hope Dallas just gets healthy, so then he's good for the playoffs. I'd rather have him back for the playoffs too. We will be able to survive without him. So outside of that, we're looking pretty good. So, some key guys are going to be missing, but I trust in the guys that will be replacing them. So I think that this is going to be a pretty low key game for the Eagles. This has the makings of a trap game considering who we play next in Pittsburgh, and that's going to be a potential Super Bowl preview. So it's one of those things where you're definitely looking ahead towards that kind of game. But Carolina has gotten the attention of people, and they're no longer like, oh, this is going to be the easiest dub ever. I think it's going to be an easy win, but I don't think the Eagles are going to overlook them either. I think they're going to try and take care of business early so they can rest dudes to prepare for next week.
Well, and the trap game and what you just talked about with the Steelers is half of why I believe it's a trap game. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second because, you're coming off of an awesome win against Baltimore where you go into Baltimore and just hand it to them. And, I mean, to go back home, play one of the worst teams in the league, while you're looking at the Lions and all their injuries that they have, and that you have really the Steelers left, and then after that, you play a Washington team that you've beaten before. Obviously, it's in Washington, but then you see the Cowboys at your house, and then you end with the Giants at your house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you play these, you have a semi-easy schedule after Pittsburgh.
Yep.
So you're really only, at this point, you're looking at that Pittsburgh game. And you're like, this is the one, like you get through this and we're cooking. This has the makings of a trap game because of the game that you just played in Baltimore and because of the game that's next week. It's that middle game that means absolutely nothing. And those are the games that you have to be careful of. This is the game, like you just said before I started talking, that you have to go in there prepared, ready to take care of business, and not focused on next week or the week before, because that's how you fall into these trap game moments. And look, the Panthers can sneak up and get a victory. They've done it this season. They can be a sneaky team. There's ways that they've found to win, but they are atrocious against the run. And that's something like you said, if Jalen Hurts gets 50 yards, it's okay. You're probably still going to win the game because Saquon's going to have 250 if you guys just do it right.
And that's going to be, but I think the main thing, that will allow this team to continue is that they are battling for the 1 seed. I think they're acutely aware of who they're chasing in the standings. So I think they're like, okay, we need this win. So we're not going to take it easy because we know what's coming. But the beautiful thing about this stretch is this could be outside of the NFC Championship game. This could be the Pittsburgh game. No, the Washington game could be their last road game of the season until the Super Bowl, because they play 4 out of their next 5 at home. The only road game is the Commanders game. And if they're a top 2 seed, they're playing home games in the playoffs. So the Eagles are going to be comfortable chilling at home for the next month and a half, potentially. So this is the golden stretch. Like, you have to take advantage of this if you're Philly. Got to embrace the fact that you're going to be finishing at home for the rest of the season, basically. And this is a great position to be in. So hopefully they just take advantage of it, because they got through the toughest part of the season, and they dominated and just won 8 straight and peeled off a huge stretch of games. So if we want to keep up with the Lions, who have won 10 straight, or keep up with the Chiefs in terms of where people stand in terms of how much they're winning, you have to keep chugging along. So hopefully this is a game where I think the Eagles are going to win. I want to give them more. I feel confident. I feel like it's going to be like a 34-28 game. I would actually go out and say it'll be like 34-17. I think this defense isn't going to allow 20 points to Bryce. So
that's what I have. I have 35-17, because I don't think Bryce is going to find much success against this defense. This defense has been just a stopping force all season long. And it truly has been all season long. It wasn't like the offense where it took 4 weeks to really find its way and find that, you can actually lean on Saquon through 95% of the game. The defense has been there since week 1, and it's been one of the top 5 defenses consistently. And so for a young quarterback like that, this is the kind of game it's eye-opening in a lot of ways. You play a defense like this. It's like Brock Purdy going up against the Ravens on Christmas Day last year when he threw 4 or 5 interceptions. It's eye-opening. You're playing a legit defense, and it's like, okay, this is the kind of game I expect from Bryce. I think he's going to throw some picks. He's going to make some mistakes. You guys are going to get the ball in some good field positions, and you're just going to lean on Saquon, rest up, Jalen Hurts' shoulder, because you're going to need his shoulder towards the end of the season when you want to start saving Saquon a little bit more for the playoffs.
Exactly. So no, this is good. I'm excited for this week. Hopefully we can just continue the train, beat Carolina and move on to Pittsburgh. So it'll be a good week. So let's pivot to what I think is going to be a very interesting discussion. I don't think, I don't think it was one this time last year. If we, to think that we would be having this conversation, you would have probably been really mad at me and really crazy about it, because we're going to talk about the Niners here, and we're going to talk about one particular topic. But let's address the snow globe game real quick. And from an aesthetic point of view, it looked awesome to kind of see. In terms of guys slipping and sliding, that's not awesome to see. But this game kind of just felt like the nail in the coffin for this team. What points do you got from this game?
Well, this has been episode blah 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 of the Behind the Back podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. That's all we got today. Like you said, it was fun to watch because snow games are always fun. They're gross. They're always won on the ground, and it's always won by the team that's more physical and ready to go. And that was what the Bills showed in this one. The Bills in a lot of ways beat the Niners the way that the Niners have been beating teams the last 4 years. And this was a good game for me from a humbling perspective, because I talked about what I expected from this team going into the season, and I talked about it last week. It was humbling for me because it made me kind of step back and realize where this team is at from a mental standpoint. this team was completely checked out going into the game, and you could tell. I mean, nobody in the stadium, nobody on either side of the ball thought that the Niners had a legit shot at winning that game. If they were going to win that game, I mean, first of all, CMC needed to stay healthy the entire time, and
He looked
he
good
didn't.
too.
He looked great. This was the best week. This was the best game the CMC, had until he went out. He looked the most like himself. He was shifty. He was quick. He had a jump on a lot of these guys, and he was finding the holes. And it was like, okay, even if we lose this game, we got CMC back. At that point, you could knock out these last 5 games. But this now with CMC out the rest of the year with his PCL injury, and it kind of questions the remainder of his career. There's a lot of questions around this team. So, I don't really want to talk about the Bills game so much. I didn't do a post game, by the way. I had some things come up after the game and during the game. So ultimately, guys, there's nothing to watch there. But it would have been the same story that has been every week, and that's the injuries and the inconsistencies and the poor coaching. It's up and down the ladder. So frustrating game, raising a lot of questions.
So let's talk about some of these questions. So let's talk about what you're going to be looking for, how this team can kind of turn back around, right? And there's a lot of factors that come with that. Brock Purdy is extension eligible, but you don't have to pay him this year. You can let him play next year on the same deal and see what happens, right? And then it's who are we going to be? Who needs to leave? Who needs to kind of be sacrificed in order for this team to get better? But I want to start with the most important position, that is Brock. So this has kind of been, not just for the Niners, but for Brock as well, has not been the best season. He has dealt with injuries as well. Again, this point last year, Brock was in the MVP conversation. He was balling out. This team was just doing anything that they wanted. And rightfully so. You had the right idea, believing in him the way that you did. I don't think there was anything wrong with buying into the talent that he was showing. And early this year, he was displaying some of those same skills with limited weapons. But this past 6 weeks or so, he's looked not great. So I want to ask you, in order to build this team around, let's say, okay, before we do the scenarios, how confident are you in Brock still? Do you think these next 5 games are going to be like a prove it style thing for Brock?
No, I think he proved it. And I'm still very confident in Brock. But there's more questions now than there have been ever for me. And I think for a lot of Niners faithful. I mean, this is, we've been put through the ringer too. This has been a rough season all around. And I'll start with just saying, obviously Brock, like you said, he had a great beginning of the season where he was finding ways to still make plays considering the weapons that were not available. Right. But I mean, bro, listen, Brandon Ayuk is no longer around, and he was never really in game shape at any given point. He had one really good game where he went 200 yards basically against Arizona, but that was the one game he had before he went out for the season. And so that's wide receiver 1. Wide receiver 2, he's going to be one of the guys, bro, that I'm ready to move on from, and that's Deebo Samuel. His separation is not there anymore. He doesn't have that separation speed. He's never really, but he really isn't there now. And in terms of getting the ball to him in space, the play calls don't make sense now because you don't have that wide receiver 1 option. He is wide receiver 1. And without Brandon Ayuk and his presence out there, it's easy to guard Deebo. And you have Ricky Pearsall out there as wide receiver 3, who's running 63 routes with no catches and essentially no, separation in defensively. So it's tough because all these pieces that you want to work really well, that used to work really well, and then this key piece in Ricky Pearsall, who you're thinking is going to work schematically, hasn't been panning out. And And you can pin that on Kyle, you can pin that on this or that or that. It really does boil down to, it's a cop-out, but it does boil down to the availability of your wide receiver one. Nobody realizes how important it is to have a wide receiver one out there to be that security blanket. And George Kittle, was upset about, his targets last week. It's the first time I've ever heard him being upset about how much he was open and not getting the ball. But in a lot of ways, Brock doesn't look to throw the ball to Kittle because plays aren't really drawn up for Kittle. And so he's not part of the normal progression. But Brock missed him on a lot of those. So I'm confident in Brock. But it would be stupid for the 49ers to pay Brock this offseason for a couple reasons. The first reason being, do you want to win? Do you want to continue building a superstar level team around a quarterback who can get this job done? Or are you willing to settle for Brock having, are you willing to gamble on Brock having one or two consistent weapons and that being enough to get you to a Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl? Because that's the thing. Are you ready to settle with him having a great tight end and a great wide receiver one, but have a wide receiver 2 and 3 that are as average can be? Because that's what you're going to be looking at when you pay a quarterback $50 to $60 million. That's the burning question. And the second point of it is Brock himself. I don't think the Niners have given themselves a chance to evaluate Brock properly. We talked about how Kyle Shanahan doesn't allow, or, the option isn't there for Brock to call audibles at the line of scrimmage. That's dumb.
Yeah.
I love Kyle
honestly.
Shanahan. That's dumb. How are you ever going to learn a quarterback and how reliable he can be as a quarterback if you're not going to let him be your second pair of eyes? Because in a lot of ways, what people don't realize is that statement that Brock said and Kyle backed up is a major red flag. That is a trust issue. It's an ego issue. It's up and down. The biggest issue is your quarterback is your second pair of eyes out there. That is the guy you work the closest with as a head coach, and especially as a offensive coordinator as well. And that's something like, if you're not allowing your guy who you trust to have the most touches out of anybody on the team to go out there, read a defense, and decide, wow, that was a stupid play call. Nah, let's do this. But instead, he's going to run it, and he's going to get decked by, by Hassan Reddick, who comes down the lane and tears his MCL. Like, it's these things that, like, I feel like the 49ers have handicapped themselves by kind of handicapping Brock in a lot of ways, not really letting him air it out. So I trust Brock because I feel like at the line of scrimmage, he can make the right read and he can make the right play. But at the same time, I have no idea because we don't let him do it.
Okay, so then let's ask this question then, because if this is really maybe a Kyle Shanahan wants somebody who is like an extension of himself, like his robot, like, oh, you're going to do what I say because I'm right. You're going to look for this, and then that's it. And if that's not there, check it down. So let's get into the weird realities. Because the reality exists for the 49ers that they don't win another game this year. It's on the table. It's on the table that they go 5-12 and potentially end up with fringe to top 10 pick. The Niners own their pick this year. If you end up with a top 10 pick, how confident, like, do you believe that there will be rumors swirling that with that potential top 10 pick, the Niners explore drafting a quarterback?
I again think the Niners would be dumb to not explore that, because whether Brock is the quarterback, the franchise quarterback, like, of the future or not, you have a top 10 pick. And at that point, you have a chance to go get another building block for your team for the future. Like, and Brock is somebody, he's a Mr. Consistent you can learn under. Like, he's coming up on veteran status in the league once he gets that contract. And that's something like a young quarterback can learn under Brock. Because Brock has been the ultimate pro in the early stages of his career. So, I hate that I'm about to say this, but Nick Wright on First Things First, he said something really eye-opening that I agreed with a lot. And that's, he said that there's a real chance that the 49ers, if they, were to get a top 10 pick, take a quarterback that where it clicked for me, that can do it, that can give you a double look. He can beat you with his legs. He can beat you through the air. I mean, that's RG3. Like that's Kyle Shanahan. That's who he's looking for. He wanted, when we look at what we wanted Trey Lance to be. Why did we get Trey? We traded up to get Trey Lance because he could use his legs and we thought he could throw the ball. Well, it didn't pan out. It didn't work. There's every reason why the 49ers should explore that possibility of going and getting a quarterback with that dual threat mentality and capability. Because I think, we talked about how Kyle's system lacks personnel. I think that's one of the personnel. That's not to say that, you can't win the Super Bowl with Brock Purdy, because you absolutely can. It's just going to be a different look and it's going to take different pieces. But if you have a quarterback that can beat you with the dual threat and you have a tight end and a wide receiver 1, well, then your wide receiver 2 and 3 won't matter as much, because your quarterback can go through his first 2 reads. If the third one's not there, which he probably wouldn't be, take off.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to kind of think about what this Niners team could be. And worst case scenario, you draft a quarterback and he's your backup, and then he's your backup for a number of years, and whatever happens, but you still have your franchise quarterback in Brock Purdy in that time. So it's interesting to think about.
There is also the possibility of, if the Niners, let's say they do draft, they're like, you know what? We hear that Quinn Ewers might fall to us, or maybe even Cam Ward. I don't think it's going to go that far. I think Cam's going to get drafted top 5. It depends on which QB needy teams end up where in the draft, right? There's also the possibility, if they're like, oh yeah, we're definitely going to be able to get our guy at 9 or 10. What are the odds that maybe you end up, okay, let's hit the reset button, in the sense, let's bring in a new QB, let's trade Brock, because Brock, playing at the level he's at right now, if Sam Darnold, when he left the Jets to the Panthers, could go for a 2nd, a 3rd, and a 5th, you can at least get, I could imagine, a 1st or maybe 2 seconds for Brock. Something that you can say, hey, we can get a new QB and get young weapons on either side of the ball to help build out this roster. We don't have to spend the $50 million in cap space that we would have to spend for Brock, and then spend it on positions that are better equipped. So would you be opposed to that reality either? I know you love Brock, but I know the goal is to win a Super Bowl. Would you be okay with that, I guess, would be the question.
It's I'm less okay with it now, but I mean, look, how many times are you going to beat your head against the wall is kind of where I'm at. And it feels like this Niners core has beat their heads against the wall to a point where it's exhausted. They're sitting down, crisscross applesauce. Their head is bleeding. They can't hit it anymore. They're exhausted. They're done. I mean, that's a lot of what you see in this team. I mean, Kyle looks like he's been through it all. When I look at this dude in his post-game, pre-games, everything, he's exhausted. And you can tell that this season's had a very large effect and bad effect on these guys. I mean, it's not just the injuries. And now this week with Trent Williams and his wife's, with their babies passing, stillborns, it's awful. It's all these terrible things happening with the 49ers. This season is worn on them. And so it raises questions of, do you need a reset in every way, shape, or form? Do a lot of these players need a change of scenery? Do we need to see some of these guys go to different teams to kind of kickstart and restart their careers in a lot of ways? It's these things you got to consider. But from a team building standpoint, if I sat back and ran it back with this team, I'd be comfortable with it. because the reality is, like, you're going to get Brandon Ayuk back. You're going to get all these guys back who have been injured all year long. It's not a rebuild. You're not in rebuild form. You don't need to rebuild. What you need to do is retool. And it's a couple pieces here. It's a couple pieces there. You focus on the lines, you can get it done. Cap space going into next season. The biggest hitters are Debo and Javon Hargrave, and both of which have been very disappointing. This season, obviously, with Javon tearing his triceps, but last year he couldn't stop the run. He was great in the pass game, but he couldn't stop the run at all. And I feel like in a lot of ways, Debo, I hate to say it, but he's washed.
Yeah.
And it's tough to see him go out there and just, run circles and not be the same player that he used to be. So from that standpoint, you shed those contracts and you look at a guy in Kyle Juszczyk who, you're paying him a lot of money to be a fullback. You've paid him a lot of money to do that for a number of years now. But while you have a fullback out there, you run less 3 and 4 wide receiver sets. You run this compact style offense in lineups. Well, get your fullback out of there and start running some 3 and 4 set, wide receivers. Could open up the field entirely for a quarterback who you want to learn audibles. So it's interesting. There's a lot of different contracts you can shed via trade, via cutting and free agency. It's, in my personal opinion, because you asked me about it, I don't think you need to rebuild. I'm not super comfortable with going out, trading Brock, doing any of that, and running with a new quarterback. I think Brock is the guy you need to run with going into next year, regardless of who you take in the top 10, if you're in the top 10. But retooling and addressing the areas you have not addressed for a number of years, specifically the offensive line, moving now to the defensive line and getting depth at other positions like linebacker, and like getting a new center, a guard. Like there's a lot of holes in this team. And I think filling those holes, getting your health back it can help you in a lot of ways. And you also talked about it off the air with me when we were talking about the real chance of the Niners losing out. They'd have an easier record going into next year.
For sure.
Like you're going to have that. You're not going to have the first in the NFC record that you had this year. You're going to have a record where you were a losing team going into the next year. So in a lot of ways, it's stacked up for you to run it back and to try and go one more time at the Super Bowl. Like that feels like the last ditch effort. So it's hard, man. It's so hard.
I guess that makes sense. I think when I look at this team, I think it's hard to say, okay, there's certain guys that it's almost impossible to kind of say, oh, we have to, like CMC, you're married to him, and not saying you would ever get rid of CMC, but he's going to be, with his extension, a 32-year-old running back whose best season is behind him. George Kittle, his best seasons are behind him. Debo and Hargrave are probably the most two likely candidates for the post June 1st cuts, which affect the cap the least and help teams shed players with bigger contracts. And then you look at a guy like Kyle Juszczyk, like what use do you have for him outside of him being a great friend of Kyle? And, he was an awesome fullback for this team and made good points, but I just don't. I guess it's just like there are guys and listen, like I understand Trent's going through a lot, but when we talk about football, I also think there's a possibility of like, okay, do we need a 41-year-old left tackle? So it's going to be one of those things where I don't know if running it back all the way would make this team better. And I know not all the way, but like keeping
right.
If the Niners ran it back next year with Ayuk, Kittle, McCaffrey, and then obviously, Bosa counts, but I'm talking about like the older veterans, and then with the cap space you save and just take a gamble on getting young guys in the building, because you see a lot of these teams that are successful operate with younger players now. And when you have the availability that the Niners have struggled with over, not even when you guys were making it to the Super Bowl, you still had injuries to key players that you, like, had they been healthy, you would have probably been able to get over the hump. I just think that Like, I just wonder. I wonder with some of these guys who consistently get injured and maybe some of these older guys, what the Niners are going to do. How loyal do they stay to some of these guys who have given everything versus how fast they want this retooling to happen, when next year will be an amazing shot for you guys. You'll get a fourth place schedule. You're going to get very easy matchups throughout the course of the season. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
That's why I say you run it. You know, when I say run it back, I'm not saying like bring back everybody. And I know you just mentioned that, but I'm saying you run it back, meaning you're not resetting with your quarterback. You have the same quarterback and you have the same wide receiver one. You have the guys who have been consistent throughout this year and the last years. Those are the guys you run with. Guys who have not been available. I hate to say it, but like Trent Williams, I mean, the past 4 years, really, he's been injury riddled seasons. And right now you've got a guy in Jalen Moore who has done an excellent job stepping in for Trent. You know, he's gone out there and been the 5th highest graded among all tackles and the 11th among all linemen at like 83.5 points. So he's out there stepping in for Big Trent, which is those are huge shoes to fill.
Yep.
So what I'm looking at is you keep, you know, I talk about this major core. You keep the core of that core, the core who is young, who's still got it, who's yes, maybe their best years are behind them in George Kittle, but look at what he does for the block game and look at his availability, right? His availability, he's been there. He's fought through a lot of injuries, and at the end of every season, he's banged up. But dudes like Fred Warner in a lot of ways, and vice versa, where they play through everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that, you know, Debo and Trent don't play through anything, but they see a completely different style of play. Like Debo runs straight through people. Trent has people running straight into him, and he's also 40 years old. So these things play a factor. When I say running it back, you run it back with the smaller core. But I don't want to run it. I don't feel comfortable right now looking at this quarterback group in the draft and saying it makes sense for us to draft this guy, trade Brock, throw this new quarterback in there, and we're ready to go for a Super Bowl run. No, I feel way more confident with Big Brock back there. And that's just kind of where I'm at. I haven't lost that confidence in Brock because I take into account what people don't take into account, and that's all the injuries and the mental fatigue of this season. It's not just the mental fatigue of the last 5 years. It's really to do with this season. The season's been a wash from the get.
Yeah, and like we said, I think the Eagles and the Niners have kind of experienced a very similar journey in these past couple of years, in the sense of we're kind of trading seasons, where one of us is having the best season ever, and then the other team struggles, and then the other team.
Right.
But so the bounce back potential for the Niners just makes sense because we're seeing it happen all the time. Every year, there's always a team that goes from worst to first, and you're going to see the Niners probably be the favorite for that next year, especially once guys get healthy. I guess another final point I kind of wanted to make on this whole Brock thing. Yeah. When we talk about, and I'm not, I'm in no way like trying to crap on Brock. I'm just curious. This is the exercise, right?
Yeah.
Kyle Shanahan has the ability to turn quarterbacks. He's, in the sense he makes quarterbacks I'm not going to say better than they are, but he elevates their game with his coaching. 100%. There are very few coaches who can do that. You got the McVays, the LaFleurs, like guys who can do that with quarterbacks. So he took Jimmy G, made him awesome enough to go to the Super Bowl. The idea that he was, they traded 3 firsts for Trey because they wanted Trey, but that didn't work out for injuries and everything like that. And then you take their 3rd string quarterback in Brock Purdy and make him into this player that he is and help him grow into the player that he is. I wouldn't be that surprised if he took a top 10 pick and elevated them ahead of schedule because of Kyle Shanahan's ability. And I wonder too, when you look at the elevation of coaches, we always talk about, this coach got X quarterback, got X player, and all of a sudden they just launched them up in terms of the win total and everything. And they stumbled into Brock. And I wonder if Kyle Shanahan had the choice again, where he doesn't have to trade 3 first-round picks to get his guy. If the guy just kind of falls to him, I wonder if he's like, oh man, this guy fits everything that I look for in a quarterback, and I can make him into something special. I just wonder if Kyle Shanahan might be the reason that the Niners don't move forward with Brock going forward.
So the only reason that I don't think that would happen is because we drafted Trey, and Trey wasn't expected to start the next year.
That makes
So
sense.
from a historical standpoint with Kyle Shanahan, I don't see that kind of a situation happening. I do agree with you. I think he one absolutely elevates any quarterback's play due to his system and the way that he, essentially handcuffs a quarterback into, running every play the way he wants, right? But how many times, Marcos, have we seen these rookie quarterbacks come in, forget the system and the coach, these rookie quarterbacks come in, take the reins from, week 1 or week 4, regardless, they take the reins in their first year, and the development, from a development standpoint, it's not there.
Yeah.
And that's the concerning part. I'm absolutely okay with the Niners taking a top 10 pick and not being a quarterback, but have him sit behind Brock. That's why I was saying, have him develop a little bit behind Brock. Learn the not just the how to be a quarterback, but learn the system, because that system takes time. I mean, Brock wasn't perfect at first either. He had a damn good, 8 games with the Niners before you guys broke his arm. But but that second year was when things really started clicking, and then just took off. And that was when we made that Super Bowl run. Mm-hmm. So it takes time to learn his system. It takes time to learn the NFL, everything, especially that quarterback position. I think that to bring in a quarterback in the top 10, completely replace what you've already got going in a quarterback in Brock, who has learned your system, who runs your system really perfectly when it's going how it's supposed to, it would be a form of malpractice, in my opinion.
Okay, I like that. No, this is good. This is good. I want, we knew we were coming into this conversation because this is going to be a conversation if the Niners lose out, or even, let's say they win this game, but they got a tough schedule. So they're going to finish with a below average record. They're not going to win the division. They're not going to end up in the playoffs this year. So that conversation begins. And that's something that I was interested in your thoughts at this point. And I know we're going to kind of bring this up probably at the end of the season, depending on what we hear when the draft gets closer. What are the rumblings? And then we can kind of gauge where we were from this point to there. So I'm excited for that. I mean, not excited, but curious.
No, but I'm excited about it too, because I mean, look, if I'm being honest, this team needs a fresh start of some kind.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how they approach this offseason. I'm excited to talk about it. As it sits right now, bro, the Niners still have a chance at the playoffs.
They're not out,
and the likelihood that they beat the Bears is still pretty high, because the Bears are they're a dumpster fire right now. And they're coming off of, just firing their head coach, who rightfully so should have lost his job, Matt Eberflus, who just completely, I don't know how you do that with the game clock management. Dude, even in Madden, I don't think I've made that mistake like that.
Right.
It's crazy.
Especially nowadays.
Yeah. So, they're a dumpster fire in themselves. But if you do lose this game against the Bears, it's not like the Niners to do it, but I would want them to rest the vets and start playing these young guys and get them legit runs. Let Josh Dobbs go. Let him throw, because he's officially quarterback 2 now that Brandon Allen's, I think, succumbed either to the injury or the fact that he's just not a quarterback 2. Give Josh a chance, and then give these youngsters a chance to show who you want to keep around and who you can move on from and package and things like that. This is the kind of scenario the Niners play into. I'm not going to talk about this Bears games much. I'll give my score here in a minute, but the biggest thing is, you win this game, you have to continue watching what these other teams in your division are doing. Are they winning? Are they losing? Because, if Seahawks went out or the Rams went out, it doesn't matter what you do, because you're not going to catch them.
Right.
So these are the things you also got to pay attention to. It doesn't matter how you do at this point. You've put yourself in such a bad spot. I can't say you put yourself. You've ended up in this spot. Mm-hmm. So it's this Bears game. Try and get a win. If you get a win, awesome. Keep rolling. But at some point, the second you're eliminated, I want to see these young guys get the runs. Mm-hmm. Again, it's not like the Niners to do that, to just sit down and run the youngsters. I really haven't seen Kyle, other than maybe one season, fully admit to missing the playoffs and then just giving these guys a run. because he's talking about Dre Greenlaw being back for the Rams game. You could be eliminated by then. Do you really want to bring Dre back if you're eliminated from the playoffs?
Might as well keep him healthy.
Yeah, we're going to have this conversation again probably next week, depending on how this game goes on Sunday. But it's an interesting situation the 49ers are in. And I'm all over the place, just like the team is, because there's just a lot going through my mind. I would love to sit here and say I know how to fix this team, but I don't. But it's also not my job. I'm not getting paid to fix this team. So we'll talk about it. We'll see how Sunday goes. As far as Sunday is concerned, the Bears are a terrible team. They defensively are not that great. They have a lot of pieces out on that team as well. And as far as, the quarterback situation, if you get home on Caleb and make him feel rattled, he's going to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the key in this one. You're not going to have Bosa. It's going to be down to Leonard Floyd to try and make that play. As far as our linebackers are concerned, I don't know if we'll have Fred. He's got that fractured ankle.
He shouldn't be playing. I don't know.
He shouldn't be playing. But he's been playing all season and hadn't admitted to that fractured ankle until about a week or two ago.
Which is crazy.
And nobody knew about it.
Nuts, dude.
So you got all these injuries. They've got injuries too. You got inconsistencies. They do too. I think the Niners are going to find a way to win. You're back home. I think they're going to find a way to win, for the sheer fact of just getting some pride back in the building. And then, we'll just kind of play from there. So we'll say 24-17 Niners.
Yeah, that was the score I was going with too. So I have a feeling, Caleb has been playing better, but Matt Eberflus got fired. That was a bad decision by him not to use the timeout, but it was also Caleb's fault to not spike the ball.
Agreed.
And he was kind of calling audibles and doing a little too much. So that was a rookie mistake as well. So we'll see. We'll see how they bounce back. He's been playing better since Shane Waldron got fired. And they simplified the offense for him. So hopefully the Niners can rattle him. This O-line is horrible, so we'll see if they can, even without Bosa, if they can get home, maybe with some, maybe they'll have some success this week. So we'll see. But yeah, 24-17 for sure. This was a good exercise, the Niners. I was very curious to see your thoughts on this, so I'm glad we had this talk. Okay, so let's pivot forward. Are you good with moving on?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so let's head on to our Chargers check-in. And the Chargers got a good win against Atlanta, forced Kirk Cousins to freaking throw 4 interceptions, and Kirky just looked awful back there. I felt really bad for him, but that's what happens when you play a very, very stout defense. So this team has been awesome defensively, and when they make their impact felt like that, I thought it was a really good outing for them. But the matchup that's coming up is a big one. It's we've had it earlier in the year, but they were missing a few important pieces. Now they're ready to go, and they're going to play the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs have been getting, I guess, people could call it lucky. They've been winning very close games in a very interesting fashion each and every week. And it's a divisional opponent. I know it's on the road, but the Chargers usually play the Chiefs very well. How confident are you that the Chargers can pull off an upset this week?
I don't feel crazy confident.
You don't? Okay.
I don't.
Hater.
It's look. I like this team a lot. You don't have J.K. Dobbins, and that's a big piece for a lot of what you want to try and get going in the early stages of games. It's tough. You're gonna have to see a big game out of Herbert, and obviously he's been starting to find a rhythm with Harbaugh lately, and they've been really clicking. And you find these plays starting to make sense, and you see things starting to click for this team. But the big thing in this one is you've got to make Patty feel uncomfortable, because regardless of what you do on the offensive end, you got to find a way to stop Patrick Mahomes, and that's going to be the tough part. You got to beat the officials as well, because no, I'm just kidding. But I don't feel crazy confident in the Chargers. I think there's a chance that they win it, but it's going to be a tough one, and they're going to have to play their best game to get this game, because I think the Chiefs have a lot of mental space in the Chargers as well.
Yeah, and the Chiefs are in a weird spot because they clinched the playoff spot already.
Right.
Obviously, the Bills are hot on their tail for the 1 seed, so they do have something to play for. So the Chiefs are going to want to come out and try, but I feel like they have been trying and just not executing. So if the Chargers come out and play a good game, they have a chance.
They do.
But personally, this is weird. I feel weird this week, but I just have a feeling the Chargers might actually get this one this week. Even without J.K. Dobbins, I think the defense has been playing so well that they might be actually able to make it happen. Last time they played, it came down to just a few plays, and Herbert was hurt, and now he's healthy. So I wonder if maybe being able to play them earlier help them out a little bit. Now that they're kind of in a good space offensively, they played well against the Ravens, even though they lost, and they played well against the Falcons. I think they might have a good shot. Will I pick them to win on our picks? I don't think so. That's a tough one to say yes to, but I do think they have a shot. So if I had to give a score, gosh, this is going to be an ugly game. All Kansas City games have been ugly this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if it comes down to the wire. I'm going to say 21-20 Kansas City.
All right. For the sake of the pod, I'll switch up. I'll go 2017 Chargers.
Let's go.
I think like you said, it's going to be an ugly one. Like all of them have been. You kind of nailed it on the head. The Chiefs have been winning in weird ways lately, in ways that just don't feel super convincing.
Mm-hmm.
And in games that they should be winning convincingly in a lot of ways. So this, like I said, I mean, the Chargers got to put together a full game here, and they got to find some success through the air. And if you can do that, make Patty feel uncomfortable and make him play from behind, I think you've got a legit shot at it.
And fortunately, you know what? No matter what happens this week, the Chargers are in a really good spot for the playoffs. Really good spot for one of the wild card spots, especially with Baltimore losing. So honestly, both teams have something to play for. This is a huge divisional matchup, a rivalry. So we'll see, if the Chargers can respond and give them a good game. So we'll see what happens there. So let's move on. We're gonna move on to our betting picks of the week, and Ben and I kind of discussed, different ways that we can, make this segment a little bit more, interesting in the sense of different ways to approach it. And this week we're going to try something a little bit different. We're going to each present 3 picks, like we kind of have been doing for most of this year, but we're going to decide based off of who we pick. So if I'm going to pick one, he's going to pick one. If they're the same thing, great, cool, easy. But if they're different, we're going to try and lobby the other dude to say, this pick is going to be better. And let me tell you why. So, Ben, I'll let you do the honors. What is your first pick of the week? And I'll see if I can convince you on mine.
First pick of the week, man. Carolina Panthers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles are favored by 12 points. Hey, I looked at this line and I was like, man, 12 points feels like a lot. But I got to thinking about it more. And we talked about what the score might be. I think the Eagles are going to beat them by more than 12 points.
Okay. So you got the Eagles winning by more than 12 points. You know what? When you saying that, if you were going to go the opposite, I was going to argue with you. But I will honestly, I've just felt like, honestly, at the end of the day, yes, it's such a big line, but the Eagles have been playing so well that it's kind of hard it makes me feel like they are going to at least win by 2 scores. So you know what? I will ride with this pick. I like this pick. So I'm going to go with that one. So I will start off with our second pick, and then I'll see what you have for your second one. So I'll save the juiciest one for last. See if you take the bait. I'm going to go with the Atlanta Falcons, Minnesota Vikings. Vikings are 5-point favorites at home. And I'm going to be 1,000% honest with you. I'm torn on this one because the story is Kirk coming back home to Minnesota, right? You're playing Brian Flores, and you practiced against Brian Flores for years again in Minnesota. Does that familiarity help? I'm not sure because he's not the same player. But they have the talent to make this interesting. 5 points is kind of a decent amount, but I think Vegas is kind of starting to get by low on the Falcons now that they're kind of showing what they are. So I do like Minnesota +5 here. I do think Minnesota, it's going to be a warm welcome for Kirk until he gets smacked around and sacked 4 times. And then they're going to be like, all right, let's throw Michael Penix in. This is kind of all over. But I think they're going to give Kirk a chance back home in Minnesota to see how that works. But I still think Minnesota covers in this one.
I like that. I feel a little bit more confident in the Cardinals winning by more than 3 against the Seahawks at home.
Okay. So you're
Personally,
you're feeling the Cardinals, even though the Cardinals crapped the bed against Seattle last time.
it's a bounce back game.
You like
This
that?
is a
Okay.
bounce back game. It's the second time around. You've learned them. The last time around they were a bit banged up too, and I just feel like this time on your home turf, considering where the division's at and considering it's a division game and you see so many splits, I think there's a really good chance that the Cardinals pull this one by more than 3.
You know what? I'm a Cardinals guy. I really like the
Yeah, I knew you
Cardinals.
were.
I've been a Cardinals guy all year. Um, Honestly, and compared to these two lines, I do think that the Cardinals, winning by 3 or more is definitely more likely. So let's ride with that. We'll do the Cardinals and Seahawks +3 here. So we'll take the Cardinals there. All right, Ben, what is your third pick of the week?
This one was hard. I want you to go first, actually.
Okay, bet. Then I'm gonna take the marquee matchup tomorrow night or today for when this comes out. Packers at Lions. Lions are 3.5-point favorites. I'm going Green Bay, dude. I'm going Green Bay upsetting Detroit, and they're 3.5. So in theory, even if the Packers lose by 3, they cover. So for those looking to cover, if it's a 3.5 spread and they lose by a field goal, they still technically cover. But I do think the Packers are going to win this game, put the Lions in a spot where the Eagles are right there to take the 1 seed. So that it's more of an emotional gamble, but I do believe the Packers went in there last year and beat the Lions on the road. So it's not completely out of the realm of questioning, and the Packers have been playing very well lately. So I do think that with the injuries to Detroit's defense, Josh Jacobs might actually have a good game and break out and actually make it consistent for them. It'll just be a matter of if the Detroit offense, which it very well could, can just keep up and keep the defense from having to save them.
Honestly, I think we just ride with that because the story on it is pretty interesting. And yeah, when you consider last year's matchup and you consider the fact that the injuries are seeing, the Lions are seeing some injuries and the Packers have knocked off 2 really good wins the last couple weeks. I think, I feel pretty safe taking Packers over Detroit in this one.
Yeah, with all the injuries, it's a Thursday night game. It's a divisional game. It's going to be intense. It's going to be ugly. I'm excited for it. I love it. So those were great. So those were our betting picks of the week. I kind of like how we did that there. So that was cool. So any final thoughts, my boy, before we head out here?
I just want to see some beam. I want to see a beam up in the air over Sacramento, and look, I want to see one more Niners win. I know that it makes sense for them to lose out from here. Let me just get one more win at the very least.
That would be great. Something where you can say, you know what, we have something to build off of, right? So
exactly.
Well, and I hope the Eagles continue to win, and hopefully the Kings can get a few wins, like we said. Really try to find something and dig themselves out of the hole. But
please,
we are back in business. So this was episode 68 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias that are located up above for all you audio listeners out there. The links to the descriptions are down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate, and follow, review, all that fun jazz. Again, we love growing with you guys. We're growing each and every week, and we want to build a community with you guys so then we can do this live and enjoy this time together. And who knows, in the coming months, we might have some changes that might pop up here and there that might bring a little bit more juice to the show. But we'll keep you guys posted as time goes by in 2025. We might be in for something special. But I am Marcos Conan Negron. Beside me here, as always, is
Banny the Jet Rats.
All right, y'all. We love y'all. We will talk to you next week. Peace.
Peace.